Good evening and welcome to episode 34 of the Political Mike podcast. What a week it's been. We're exactly 1 year away from the time in which the world turned upside down. 1 year marking the anniversary that the COVID-19 virus really took a strong effect on American society and everyday life. In addition to that, Congress has passed a sweeping legislative measure to address this pandemic. And it has passed the House and has been signed by President Joe Biden, his first major legislative action since taking office just a little over a month ago. In addition to that, we're seeing that there's a lot of Republican criticism to this bill, mostly for its huge spending measures. And here to help me break all of this down are very distinguished panelists. I'm excited to have the panelists I have. I'm feeling like I'm in class. Most of them are from Howard Law. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce these amazing folks. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Maria Nassir. Maria is currently in her last year pursuing her Juris Doctorate at Howard University School of Law. She hopes to focus her work on immigration and human rights and civil rights law. She obtained her English BA with a minors in information technology and graphic design from George Mason University. Over her professional career, she went on a study abroad program with her school to South Africa to take classes and intern with the Judicial Inspectorate of Correctional Services and worked as a student attorney at the Human and Civil Rights Clinic with the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless and CASA de Maryland Incorporated. This past year, she built her experience with Al Ortro Lado, the Democratic National Committee, and the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center. She's a student contributor to the 1619 Project Law School Initiative. In her spare time, she loves to read, write, hike, and spend time with her friends and family. She hopes to lend her time and skills to public service in line with Charles Hamilton Houston's vision of social engineering, a lawyer through and through. Thank you so much, Maria, for being here. Next, we have Chris Johnson. Chris is a third-year student at Howard University School of Law as well. Hailing from the great state of Michigan, Chris graduated from Howard University in 2018 with a BA in history. During his undergraduate education, Chris had the privilege of interning in Congress, first with the Democratic staff for the House Committee on Education and the Workforce, second with the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. I've had a similar experience. In addition, Chris had the pleasure to intern with Friedman Consulting LLC and the General Counsel offices of both the Great Lakes Friedman Consulting LLC and the Great Counsel offices of both the Great Lakes Water Authority and the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP. Upon graduation, Chris will be joining the law firm Debevoise and Plimpton LLP, focusing on corporate transactional matters, and he was also going to be a faithful donor to the Democratic National Committee. Chris, thanks for being here. I added that last part in there, by the way. But I'm going to go ahead and introduce Jasmine. It's always such an amazing experience to have Jasmine back on the discussion. So she had to be on for a week like this. Jasmine was born and raised in the Gateway to the West, St. Louis, Missouri. Upon graduation from one of two historically Black colleges and universities in Missouri, Harris-Stowe State University, Jasmine moved to Washington, D.C. to pursue a career serving the people of her hometown as a congressional intern for former Congressman William Lacey Clay Jr. of Michigan's 1st District. After the completion of her internship, she became the staff assistant for Congressman Gerald Nadler of New York, chairman of the House Committee on the Judiciary. Currently, Jasmine serves as a special assistant for the United States Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. By serving in these roles over the last 3 years, she witnessed essential hearings that laid the foundation for the case of the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump. She's also one of the very few personal staffers to be present on the Senate floor during those proceedings. As a result, she had the unique opportunity to see firsthand the entire impeachment process from inception to reality. In addition to her time spent as a staffer in both the House and Senate, she also serves as the vice president of the Senate Black Legislative Staff Caucus, a 2020 to 2021 scholar for the American University Women in Politics We Lead program, and a steadfast advocate for the success of HBCUs for their students, faculty, and staff. Jasmine, it's always a pleasure to have you. So thank you for giving us some of your time tonight. Mike Walker. Mike is a third-year law student. You're starting to see a trend. A third-year law student at Howard University School of Law, Philadelphia native, He's an avid Philadelphia sports fan. During his time at Hustle, he has served as a member of the Howard Law Journal and the Education Law Society. After graduation, he's going to serve as a judicial law clerk in the U.S. District Court for the District of Connecticut. So, Mike, thanks for being here. And last but certainly not least, Cassandra Knopf, 3L as well at Howard University School of Law. She's passionate about politics and justice from a young age, and she began engaging in the civil process by writing to the president to protest the Iraq war, the Iraq invasion, at the age of 8. Recently, this translated into a passion for human and civil rights law, and specifically environmental justice. Cassandra has interned with Representative Sharice David's office on Capitol Hill, and she worked for an environmental nonprofit based in Maryland. She has secured a fall position last fall for the Environmental Protection Agency, and she's also excited about graduating this May as well. Excellent panel. I want to start off the conversation by talking about the sweeping legislation that has just passed into law. President Biden's first legislative victory, the $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. This is a very significant piece of legislation. And I know a lot of attention has gone to the fact that about 85% of American households are now going to be expecting a $1,400 check in the mail. But there are other provisions that really just make this legislation one of the most progressive pieces of legislation since the Civil Rights Act. For instance, the COVID relief bill is actually giving Black farmers, $5 billion, who would have, and these are farmers who have lost their 90% of their land over the past century because of systemic discrimination and a cycle of debt. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina took to CNN and said, well, this constitutes as reparations. In addition to this, the Pew Research Center shows that there's broad support for this legislation. 70% of the American public in this very polarized era support this bill, while only 3 in 10, 28% opposed it. 41% of Republicans support it, and Republican-leaning independents, while 94% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning supporters support this bill. I want to get your thoughts. Anyone can jump in on, just the magnitude of this bill. And being that this bill has passed with zero Republican support, what are the implications down the road? 2022 is on the minds of a lot of these senators, especially because a lot of these Republican senators have announced they will be retiring. I think Roy Blunt, just being the 5th Republican senator, announcing he's not running for re-election next year. What say you, panelists?
Well, thanks for having us, Mike. I'll say that to answer your question about what does this mean in general, I think generally speaking, this is the way it had to go. You're never going to get the consensus needed to pass legislation with 60 votes in the Senate the way maybe some people, and obviously, of course, Republicans would say is the proper way of doing things. As far as what it means for the Biden presidency moving forward, I think it's kind of telling that even though it didn't really get the Republican support that you would want a truly bipartisan bill to have, I will say it's pretty telling that there aren't very many Republicans who are saying a whole lot negatively about it outside of generally not supporting it like they have in the past. And so I think that speaks to the fact that they know there are a lot of good provisions in this for for their constituents, and they want to obviously keep keep a safe face and say, like, well, I never supported this, but at the same time, they aren't actively trying to tear it down and tear Biden down for it. So I think it actually is telling about where the constituents stand, even though it doesn't have the support that you would want.
And then you have senators like Rick Scott of Florida telling cities and states not to accept the funding from this legislation. Roger Wicker, another Republican senator, saying, just again voicing ardent opposition to this bill. And I'm just assuming that they're playing by the same playbook of 2009, when you had Democratic control, and you had the need for immediate legislative action, and you had on the other side, the Republican side, just a refusal to, give any kind of concession or any kind of support to what could potentially be a victory for the new president. And I think, what the Biden administration is doing is learning from that. And part of why I think he's going on the air tonight is to ensure, because as the president, you're also wearing the hat of leader of the party, that it was the Democrats' responsibility that this bill actually became a reality. We would not have this conversation had not been for Georgia flipping with Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff now taking their seats and bringing back the bacon for their constituents with this bill. But do you all think that this would age well in light of the fact that so much that we expect to stick on politicians in this Trump era, or what was the Trump era, doesn't seem to have the effect it would have 30, 20 years ago? Is this something that would cost them legislatively?
I think there's multiple layers of what's happening within the GOP, and it's very confusing, and some of it's really contradictory. So it's really difficult to say. Because on the one hand, we have them trying to fall back on traditional uses of like attacks on Democrats for, personal reasons or, past misconduct reasons. But then they're in the position where they have enabled behavior like that to an upteenth and absurd degree for 4 years. So they can't really have teeth on that. But then they have also people within their own party, like Josh Hawley and Senator Cawthorn, who are coming out with these completely outrageous allegations against them. So I don't think there's any cohesive mode of thought behind it, except for pure political survival at this point. They don't represent the working class, because they're not for lower taxes on working class and higher taxes on the top 1.5%. They're not for stronger unions. They're really more impressed with helping shareholders for large corporations. So to answer the question, it's very difficult to predict how people are going to react to them, because they're kind of all over the place. Like, how are you supposed to react when someone is being very inconsistent and surprising at all times? You kind of just have to reel and wait for it to even out, right?
And let me clarify to your point, Cassandra, about the inconsistency. Roger Wicker voted against the bill, but ended up praising the bill afterwards. And so I'm wondering if that's like a playbook of what's to come with the Republicans on the Senate, in the Senate and the House, who have voted against this bill. But once the effects of this bill actually get, felt by the American public, remember, $14 billion is going towards vaccine distribution. You also have a large portion of this, of the funding going towards schools being reopened, $130 billion to ensure that schools can open safely, have improved ventilation, hire extra janitors. When all of these things actually take effect, and the public, which already is in support of this bill, see the tangible effects of this bill, there's no way to go but up, in my view. And so I'm wondering if they're going to try to say, well, I wasn't against the spirit of the bill. I was against the amount of money we were pouring into it, because I'm still a fiscal conservative. And so I'm wondering if that argument would still stick in light of the fact that there seemed to be such, no cooperation in terms of on their side to get what we have accomplished.
Yeah, I agree. What I really feel like this bill does is it's doing everything that Republicans have been saying they wanted to do all of this time, but never really had the guts to do, right? Biden is doing a really good job of like sticking to what he knows how to do, which is, meet with the people that he's supposed to meet with and be one of those people that kind of works across the aisle. Well, he knows that he's not going to get their support right now because they're still dealing with the fallout of this past election. So now you're starting to see states like Georgia and all of these other states that are putting these incredibly just disgusting new rules and laws into place that is going to make it harder for people to vote in upcoming elections, like the midterm and the next general election and so on and so forth. So even though they are like not really kind of speaking up about the bill and what it's doing, and it's helping the economy and this and the third. I think a lot of their attention is retreating back to their home states and focusing on how to make it harder for these states in the future to flip. We have so much in jeopardy over the next year, that they're going to choose their battles wisely, and I don't think this is a battle that they want to fight right now. And this is just being real.
That's a really good point. And I was thinking, in the waning days of the Trump presidency, actually throughout the Trump presidency, there was no real serious concern about fiscal conservatism. Nobody was wondering how much the wall was going to contribute to the deficit. Nobody was wondering about any of the programs that Trump wanted to do, how much that would contribute to the national debt. And so towards the end, he started to act like a 1960s mayor when he started to announce that he wanted actually 2,000 checks and that Pelosi wasn't being generous enough. And that was the first time you actually really saw a public break with Mitch McConnell and prominent Republicans from Trump, where they were saying, well, we don't really want to get $2,000 checks out, but we're for COVID relief. And now we have the 1,400 proposal go forward, and they take a strong, just complete opposite, like not even trying to meet halfway in the middle. And so the way to jump back into that fiscal conservative argument to me is going to be like political gymnastics, because you had a party that was just capitulating all the way without any kind of concern for deficits or spending. And all of a sudden now, when the people need it, that's all of a sudden when the concern for deficit and spending come back. Chris?
Yes. I mean, well, I would just say that in regards to like the political gymnastics, of course, they're going to be like, the Democrats are increasing the deficit, when in actuality, you can look back, most of the deficits have increased under Republican presidents. But it's not a problem until we have a Democrat who's in office. And so I think in terms of this bill and like what it means for the future, even if it is going to be like a positive outcome, which we are sure it's going to be, and it's going to have a positive impact on the community and for like the country, you're probably going to still have an argument that if the cost was too much or was needed, because they're going to say that, it's too late to do this, the economy's going to come back soon, this sort of thing. So I think it's just going to come down to, not even like a denial, just to like, yeah, I supported this, in theory and in practice. It was too much money though, and so I can't go as far as to say that it was worth it. But, the economy is great now, and here we are, but they're still going to also, as Jasmine mentioned, do things like entrench themselves in their jurisdictions and, make it harder for people to vote, because they are aware of the fact that their party base is not expanding. And that's the problem. And it's just going to be an issue of, they're always going to find a way, at least in my view, of getting around, like owning up to, yes, we were dealing with this and we may have been wrong about this sort of thing. But of course, they're still trying to deal with their own issue of, is the Republican Party still the party of Trump? Time will tell. I'm sure it probably will be in, the next 2-3 years, even 4 years from now, but we'll see. So I just think it just depends on, I don't think there'll ever be a moment where it's going to like play out that, oh, you didn't vote for it, so we're not going to put you back in office. I don't think that may be a thing in certain, especially in many districts in the country.
That's a good point. And I was thinking about, as you were talking, what Congressman Clyburn said on the show last week, where he said, this is a bipartisan bill. You have 41% of Republicans supporting it. You have 94% of Democrats supporting it. It doesn't get more bipartisan than that these days. So to have that much support and then say, well, this is not bipartisan because the elected leaders didn't vote for it, isn't really a representation of how bipartisan this bill truly is among the American public. And then I was thinking about CPAC and that they couldn't really find something to attack Biden on. I was listening to a political analyst who was actually on the ground at CPAC, and they said when you go to the different booths and look at the different things they have, the T-shirts and all of the souvenirs and different things, they were still attacking Obama and Hillary Clinton and didn't really have anything to stick for Biden. And the idea that he's this crazy liberal is ready to spend and very fiscally irresponsible and all these other things just doesn't stick. And so the fact that you have this bipartisan support for such a legislative measure, coupled with the fact that the public does not see Biden in the negative light that the party wants them to see him in, I think all works to his advantage as we're moving forward. And I know it's going to get harder because after this bill, you need 60 votes in the Senate as a threshold for, gun reform. And all these other important pieces of legislation are going to require so much more support. But this, I think, sets the tone really well because all of a sudden now the public is going to feel, the first effects of this, and then Biden going on the stump with Kamala Harris after this primetime address just really hammers it home. And I think that's the mistake President Obama didn't make, and I think that's why it cost him the midterms in 2010 and 2014. But I think Biden's determined not to make those same mistakes. Maria, did you have any thing you want to add?
I just wanted to add the part about the reparations. I don't think as amazing as this bipartisan bill has passed. It's great. The reparations comment is something I think I have to address is this cannot stand in the way of reparations. I think that has to be its own separate movement, and it has to be as big as how Howard is working to make it. To equate it to this bill, it would just not do justice to all the work that is going on with this.
Yeah, and it was a little bit difficult to hear you just now, but I think the gist of what you were saying was that as it relates to this bill, the public support really is in alignment with the effects that this bill would have, which we've been emphasizing. And when you think of the fact that he brokered this deal between Johnson & Johnson and Merck, I was just thinking this is straight out the book of like FDR, where you had all of these huge companies donating to these wartime efforts and putting aside their temporal competitiveness at the time, for the sake of the national well-being. And that was a historic moment. This is a one-shot vaccine. So if you have 100 million doses of this vaccine, that's 100 million shots in arms for folks. But I want to transition a little bit as time is slipping away, because the House has been making great strides in relatively little time. The House Majority Whip Clyburn and Representative Nadler, the Judiciary Chair of the House, introduced the Enhanced Background Checks Act. This is really significant because we're just about almost 6 years removed from the attack on that church in South Carolina, of the mass shooting that took place. And so now we have this legislation that is proposed to actually extend the initial background check review period from 3 to 10 days. And after that 10 business day period, if a background check is not completed, a purchaser may request an escalated review to spur the FBI to complete its investigation. The bill also includes important protection for law-abiding gun purchasers, that if the escalated review is not completed within the required 10-day period, the sale must go ahead and proceed. That's a compromise to ensure that it gets some kind of bipartisan support. The Charleston Loophole, which is one of the key provisions in here, is the flaw in the background check system that enabled a gunman to obtain a weapon used to murder 9 people and wound 3 others in 2015 at a Bible study. And so this legislation is aimed at ensuring that loophole is no longer in effect. In light of the fact that you have politicians, Republican politicians, who are getting so much contributions from the NRA and support from the NRA, does that concession of allowing a responsible gun owner to continue to have a gun, after the background check, is that enough of a concession to get, in your view, panelists, enough support to move forward? And again, the concession is, that for law-abiding purchasers, gun purchasers, if the escalated review is not completed within the required 10 days, the sale may still proceed. In your view, is that enough?
So the question is it enough that there's like a 10-day, is that enough of a concession for this bill to actually pass in the Senate? You're asking, essentially. You're muted, Mike. If you're talking to us. Okay.
You're muted.
Mike, you're muted if you're talking to us.
I'm so sorry. Is that enough of an olive? Is that enough of an olive branch for the other side to go ahead and meet the Democrats in the middle and get this in the Senate? I know it's a tall order because we're talking about a very split Senate, and even Congressman Clyburn said, look, the Democrats are not really in control of that in the Senate. We have a 50-50 House, and as long as you have the filibuster, the Democrats are not really in control. So is this enough? And if not, what should, in your view, what other provisions would likely allow this bill to pass?
Well, I actually kind of just want to address this filibuster. I think that trying to offer olive branches and try to meet halfway in the middle and get bipartisan support is laughable at this point. We were not able to get a single bipartisan vote on any of the COVID relief bill, even though we're getting Republican senators now trying to take credit for it, like we pointed out before. We did not get a single vote of support for it, and yet we still got rid of the $15 minimum wage. So to me, that was a loss. To me, that was a poor move by the Democrats, because what we have seen in the last 4 years is that Republicans, when they have any kind of power, they use it to achieve an agenda. And what we are seeing now is that Democrats are given the same hand that we saw Republicans have before, and they are using restraint in order to coax some kind of positive reaction out of an extraordinarily volatile party that is more likely to turn around and bite you than it is to actually do anything to help. So I think the entire way of framing this gun reform bill as we're trying to get more bipartisan support is almost a useless endeavor, because what they're going to do then, if they see that the Democrats are just trying so hard to make this seem like they're looking for cooperation, all they have to do is shut it down like they did under Obama and say, no, we're not going to cooperate and we're going nowhere. And they know that. They know that the Democrats are weak in terms of the fact that they would like to stay by the rules and play by tradition and give benefit of the doubt. But we need to recognize that that is not good faith in both directions. So if we are serious about passing some kind of gun reform, we need to take that reality into account before we decide if we're willing to try and make it more palatable to a party that is not willing to cooperate.
And that's a really good point, because I was thinking, is the minimum wage not being in the bill, is that necessarily as much as a bad thing? Because now you can have another bill that's popular, and you can campaign on that and rally support with that. And so if the first bill passes and it's popular and then people see the effects of it, would folks have more faith in a second popular bill that people already, the majority of the public already agree that the minimum wage should be raised? And in addition to that, they agree that there should be some kind of comprehensive gun control. And so if you just capitalize on that popularity, and in addition to being on the stump and taking credit for the bill, getting folks generalized and galvanized around support for these two legislative measures, would that be enough to cross the finish line, to pressure enough Republicans, if not pressure them, and get the public to pay enough attention to sustain until the midterms?
Well, to kind of go back to the gun control legislation, I think that's specific, to the NRA and the stranglehold that the NRA has on Republican lawmakers, generally speaking. And so, and the NRA is we already said that they're going to push back against any sort of bill, basically like this, that's going to curtail gun ownership rights, even if it is supposed to be a little bit of a concession. And so, as long as the NRA, I think, is in control of the situation, then I don't really think that there's any olive branch or concession that can be made that would be included into an effective gun control bill, at least, that will appease enough Republicans to make it work. When it comes to the your other question, follow-up question about having allowing out this bill law, like the pandemic relief law, I should say, go into effect and have positive results, and then follow up maybe with the minimum wage. Would that allow Democrats a little bit of leeway? I think that a lot of the problems in Congress is that people are very issue specific, and it seems as though there's only very limited number of issues that are really on the radar of voters, both Democrat and Republican. And so I think when it comes, obviously the pandemic relief bill is something that's on everyone's mind because it's affecting everyone. The minimum wage is another issue that's on people's minds. But I think gun rights is something else that's always just going to be on the minds of Republican voters and in some Democratic voters to a lesser extent. And so I don't know if there's any sort of goodwill or momentum that Democrats can tap into that's going to be generic across all issues. So I just feel like it's going to be always a fight depending on the issue.
Right. And I just wanted to plug in the bill that I brought up has 60 co-sponsors, but Senator Richard Blumenthal is also bringing a companion bill to the Senate side. And he's a very ardent supporter of gun control. And to see the dynamics at play, of course, the odds are right now that we won't get gun control. But if we can get the ball moving, because remember, Obama said that was one of his failures as president in the aftermath of the 2012 Sandy Hook shooting, where they were trying to get gun control passed in the early days in 2013. It did not happen. And he stood in the Rose Garden with the parents and expressed his frustration. So this is going to be, Biden was right there. Biden was helping whip up the vote count for that. So this, I think, has a more of a personal stake for him, because he was actually in the arena the first time we were trying to get this thing done. But if there are no other thoughts, I want to pivot a little bit to.
I had something to say, actually.
Chris, jump in.
About the 10-day, no, I don't think that's going to get through the Senate, just by the nature of things, nor would the minimum wage $15 increase probably get through the Senate either, especially if it has to get 60 votes. It's not happening, more than likely. Now, of course, it could probably generate some momentum or something like that, but I also think that Cassandra brought up an excellent point of the issue becomes, okay, well, we know that filibuster is going to be the roadblock. On the flip side, you get rid of it, then the question becomes once Republicans, if they take control of the Senate, let's say, I don't know, a few years from now, 4 years from now, and do the same thing, and there's no way to stop their agenda as well. So I think it's just a really tricky situation Democrats are in currently in trying to get their agenda done, but also can be mindful of the fact that even those procedural roadblocks they have to doing what they want to do actually benefits them potentially down the road. So it's do you do something now to benefit yourself currently, or do you bite yourself in the foot and then by 10 years from now, you can't stop more tax cuts, something like that. So I just think that personally, this 10-day thing is a great idea. I think it would definitely be helpful in terms of gun control, but I just don't think that you get enough Republican support to actually push it through the Senate and to make this an actuality.
I just wanted to say one quick thing about my perception of this filibuster idea. It's I understand that it's been used as a congressional tool for as long as it's been around. And so both sides benefit from it. But the fact is, it has killed so much legislation in the cradle that we really don't have any progress or anything to revise or anything to amend in places that really need that legislation quickly. So I think that even if we get rid of the filibuster and it does end up hurting Democrats in the future in one way or another on specific legislation, it'll at least open the door for there to be further legislation and discussion on it. And it would force the government to actually work. It would stop them from just sitting on their hands if they don't like what's being said by the opposing party. And I think that the perception of government inaction has done so much to destroy faith in our government as it is, that we need to have some definitive, plain steps to regain faith, because we're in the middle of a pandemic that was totally avoidable, and people are going to forget that. We need to figure out a way to regain trust.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because Clyburn this morning on Morning Joe, had mentioned in reference to HR 1, which is going to be a huge voting rights piece of legislation. Thurman used the filibuster to strip away civil rights, and so he was saying that the filibuster has really been a vehicle not for extending debate or extending discourse about public policy issues, but as a way to damper and hinder civil rights from being expanded to the American public. And so with that in mind, to your point, Cassandra, the filibuster has really been a huge roadblock in the way of a lot of legislative policies, progressive legislative policies. But as it relates to the immigration issue, because I've seen a lot of folks on my timeline complaining about how Biden took them for granted, how the Democratic Party sold them out. They were told to vote Democrat because things would change, and Biden has not really done anything, according to them, as it pertains to the issue of immigration that's different from Trump, because people are still in detention centers, and children are still not united with their parents. But when we're looking at the legislative side of things as it pertains to immigration, we see that Nancy Pelosi did not have the whip count this week to pass the comprehensive immigration reform bill that Biden put forward. And so now they're looking for an alternative way to get this done. And that alternative way is where we are right now. So the move the Biden bill to has to go through now is through the committee, while the full House votes on more targeted immigration legislation that already enjoys broad caucus support. So it seems like a very piecemeal approach, all with the same goal in mind. According to Jerry Nadler, he said, we need to engage in some consultation with key members and stakeholders, but I see no reason why we wouldn't mark it up when we reconvene in April. Biden's proposal is a top priority for progressives and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, who say it's a critical piece of legislation that must have action in the early months of his term. Remember, the Hispanic population was saying that the Democratic Party has not really catered to them, and so you saw a large portion of Hispanic voters in Florida, for instance, going and considering voting for the Republican ticket. I want to get your thoughts on what's being done as it pertains to immigration. Are you in agreement with this new approach to have like a scattershot approach for legislation because of the lack of support you need for the whip count? And do you resonate with what people are criticizing Biden for? Should he be more aggressive as it pertains to immigration?
So what I'm going to say is, having had the opportunity and the honor to work for Congressman Nadler, I know this is something that he cares deeply for, right? I remember us making sure that he, when all of this stuff was going on with kids being put in cages and, him going down to these detention centers and going up to New York to the detention centers and stuff all over the country, you had him actually seeing it firsthand, where, systems were being put in place, not just within, the Trump administration, but they set, immigration back decades, if you want to be real. Now you have Biden coming in trying to unravel so many different threads and trying to get kids back with their families and make sure that students are being deported. And there has to be a clear way to do that. And I think piecing together different things that are going to help put everything together into a nice little box will help that undo that work that Trump and his administration did, in terms of reforming ICE, in terms of making sure that, nobody is even talking about the things that are happening to the women down there that were in those centers that were being tested and pricked on, So you have to look at everything. I know we all want things to happen instantaneously, right? I know, I think we were talking about, Maria was talking about the reparations comment that was made. Giving 2% of farmers some money from a bill isn't reparations. We understand there's more work that goes into making sure that reparations and the Black community is taken care of, the Hispanic community is taken care of, the Asian American community is taken care of. We all have priorities, but we all need to come together and find that sweet spot to be able to help us all and stop trying to we need this right now. We also need this right now, but we're in the middle of a pandemic. And this person also said they need this. We have to find a good place in the middle. And that's what's going to that's what it's going to take for this immigration conversation to really push this things forward.
That's absolutely right. And in addition to that, I was thinking back on the first term of Obama's presidency and a lot of criticism people in the Black community. I mean, when I went to the barbershops, people were saying he didn't do anything for Black people. He didn't do anything for this community. People who were in the academia wanted to take the road less traveled by and criticize the president. But when you look at the fact that you have 2 years and you have a certain amount of political capital that you can spend, and you also have a national crisis in the form of a financial crisis, the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. There's very little you can do without full cooperation of both houses of Congress. And I'm not saying to get everything you want done, but a party, remember the grand bargain that was supposed to be struck between John Boehner and Obama. And Obama actually allowed a lot of these entitlement programs to be gutted under the grand bargain. And the Republicans looked like they were going to agree with it, only for them to say, we're not going to agree to this. The Tea Party caucus said, we're not going to go along with this. And Obama took to the podium and said, will they agree on anything? Will they say yes to anything? And so Biden, I think, is learning from that as recent history, and he's determined not to make that same mistake. I understand, like you said, Jasmine, there's an urgency, and when we're seeing injustice in front of our eyes, and we're seeing children being affected and mothers, and we want to act now. But the political reality right now is actually causing us to take more of a long-winded approach than we would like, because of the fact that we don't have the full support that we need. Remember, the House lost significant amounts of seats this past fall, and we're in a very, deadlocked Senate that requires folks to cross over the aisle in order for anything to get done. We're no longer, now that this COVID package is behind us, now we have to, it's much harder. And so, my question is for you panelists, with that in mind, does Biden still deserve criticism for not, being a little bit more aggressive and not making immigration at the forefront as of right now? Or, being that we're still in the early days of March, COVID-19 has to take full and top priority?
I definitely think the pandemic still needs to be taken priority. And like Jasmine said, there were so many points she made that we have to look at the fact that Trump built his whole campaign on borders. He built it all on against dreamers, against unaccompanied children trying to get in, against women who just need to aside. We need to remember that this is like a very important matter, but that there's a lot that needs to be done. Jasmine did a really good job with wrapping it up and just saying that yes, there's criticism on this side. There's a lot that needs to be done, and it's going to take time to do it. And how is he handling those matters? But once again, I think the pandemic is at the forefront. Immigration will have to. There's going to have to be some way, like I said, to find an alternative during this deadlock.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, in addition to that, a lot of people, to both of your points, have this sense of impatience, and politics is really the art of the possible. It's all about, we can have lofty ideas, but if we don't have the vote count, we have to work extra hard, and we have to make concessions. And as it pertains to immigration, I do believe that that's a top priority for this administration. I do believe that because remember, you already saw a change. The Homeland Security has already ensured that they're going to try to find a way to reunite parents and children. We did not have that in the past administration. And, the theme of this conversation, just to wrap everything into a nice bow, is what a difference a president makes because of the amounts of policy changes that permeate through these different bureaucratic agencies. And so when we're looking at, the policies that have already changed, the tide that's already changed in just a few short days, when we think about it, we're just coming off of 4 years of the previous administration. Things have changed so much already, drastically. I think we need to give it a little bit more time. And I do think that COVID-19 had to be done first, because if it wasn't, think about the rest of the legislative agenda. Would that have really, had momentum had this not been a top priority? Had you not had the public support behind the first thing that you do? But what's also interesting is that Wyoming Republicans I think this week or last week are contemplating a change to state election regulation that might make it more durable for one among their very own, Representative Liz Cheney, to win re-election. This is interesting because of the fact that they have already censored Liz Cheney, and Marjorie Taylor Greene goes off scotch-free. And I've had Republican folks on this panel before, and even they were not able to give really a clear, coherent answer as to why that is. Why is it that you're censoring Liz Cheney but not censoring the one that started the whole ruckus in the first place? What are your thoughts on this election law change? Because this comes at the backdrop of all kinds of states. Arizona, the Supreme Court was considering an Arizona law made to elections to their election law. Georgia, the House, Legislative House and the Legislative Senate in Georgia have both put forward measures to make it more difficult to cast a ballot for votes to be counted by mail. And all of these things we expected in the aftermath of this whole voter fraud fiasco that culminated on January the 6th. But what say you, panelists?
Well, as far as Liz Cheney goes, I think you hit the nail around the head, Mike. It's retribution. I think Republicans feel as though, and maybe rightly or wrongly, I don't know, but they feel as though that they have to play the Trump card even when he's not in office, because they feel like all of their careers are tied to it, and many of them have made the choice that they are going to do whatever they have to do to stay in office above passing good legislation, meeting the needs of their constituents in other substantive areas. And it shows. I think as far as the changes in Georgia and Arizona and other places, that kind of reflects a 20-year, maybe even longer project of the Republican Party of realizing that in order for them to continue to hold many of the offices that they do, they have to make it more difficult for people to vote, because they're outnumbered. Their constituents are outnumbered if we have everyone voting. And so we have a Supreme Court case, out of Arizona that was just argued on section whether the Arizona's voting laws violate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, and I think it's not very provocative to expect the Supreme Court to suggest that it doesn't, and that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which may be one of the last sections that actually has any sort of teeth, will no longer be very effective once the Supreme Court, a conservative majority of the Supreme Court, says so. So I think it's part of a larger project that's been going on for decades of the Republican Party narrowing the aperture of people who are able to actually get to the polls and vote.
And Jasmine?
No, I was just going to say, of course you want to feel bad for people like Liz Cheney, but as a Democrat, I do not feel bad for her. Okay, let's just be real about that, right? Outside of the one thing that she voted for, which was impeaching Trump, whatever. What else? Look at all the other things that she did. So you are seeing people back home in her state say, out of all of the stuff that you did for us that we care so deeply for, we don't like the fact that you voted to try to impeach our president that fairly won his election, and blase, whatever Trump people are saying, right? I don't feel bad for her, but at the same time, I feel like elections have consequences. No matter whatever party is in the winning seat, the opposite party is going to do whatever they can to try to rile up those voters and get those people going, or get different laws and things like that put in place to be able to help them, next time around. It's just unfortunate that we see a continuous pattern. This isn't something that's new. Republicans have been doing this for decades. When you're talking about voter suppression, being very strategic about engineering voter fraud and all the rest of that, all of these different things like that, we're witnessing this, and there's literally nothing we can do. And Democrats are going to feel it the worst when it comes time to get out there and whip up votes and get people out to vote for the midterms. And it's going to be horrible. But I think the thing that we can take away from this is that the Democrats have, like, I think we were talking about this earlier, just like how we have the power to stop being afraid to use that power, because Republicans are going to do it whenever. Use the power that we have right now to make it harder for them in the midterm, make it harder for them whenever they want to like put up somebody to run against Biden or whoever will be running in the next 3 years. Like, they have to do what they can right now and use their power, no matter how small and finite it is, use the power that they have to set us up on the federal level to avoid these things later on down the line.
Yeah, and to your point, if I was Jamie Harrison, I'll be wanting to ensure that I hit home the message that they have done nothing to bring home any kind of relief, COVID-19 relief. I was in a meeting this week with Congressman Adam Kinzinger, and he was really, taking questions. And one of the questions I asked him was that, in light of the fact that CNBC just last month said that 75% of the party still want Trump to lead it, how do you convince, because remember, he started a new super PAC called America First. How do you convince that 75% that it's in their best interest to avoid, to just abandon him and move forward, focusing on fiscal conservatism, focusing on social conservative issues, folks like Kinzinger, Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney, Pat Toomey, Markowski, Susan Collins, all of these Republican moderates who have taken a break from Trump. How do you hit home the message that it's in their interest to leave him? And he said, well, that number might not look the same in the summer. And we've got to focus on the fact that we're a party that believes in equal opportunity. They believe that, the child born into, an inner city impoverished situation should have an opportunity to be, to have an education and have opportunities that put them on the same level as someone born in a wealthy family. He said he had a very close, a very strong passion for inner cities. And so that's something that's going to be a core part of what he's trying to do in terms of restoring the Republican Party back to its conservative roots. I think personally, Kinzinger, I've always suspected, had presidential ambitions. If not 24, I'm thinking 2028. But, he sounded sincere. He sounded like he had an actual plan, and there was a frustration. But, is that falling on deaf ears? When you're looking at Wisconsin, that's as Republican as it gets. 28 of the 30 state senators are Republicans, and 51 of the 60 state representatives are Republicans. Trump won 70% of the state's vote in November. So this is as red as it gets. And you have, a civil war there where the minority is the Liz Cheney. And so this is going to be a very interesting dynamic going into the next 2 years. I'm wondering if these seats that are up for grabs now are going to be filled by more Trump-like senators. And if so, that really just derails the Biden agenda moving forward. Any other thoughts?
Well, I'll just add real quick that I think they will be, especially because you don't even have the distraction of Trump being president and making awful decisions. And so, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. If everyone was willing to be on board with the things that his rhetoric and the things that he symbolized when we were faced with the actual fallout of those things, then I think it stands to reason that people, without being faced with the negativity of it, will kind of be more reminiscent in places like Wisconsin, where Trump's support has remained very strong. So I think in those areas, it will be. On the other hand, I think in places like suburban Philadelphia, where Donald Trump also really did well in 2016 and didn't do as well in 2020, I actually think that that will stay trending in the direction of more moderate Democrats, maybe even moderate Republicans. And that's why you see people like Pat Toomey kind of warm up to the idea of moving himself away from Trump-isms and that sort of rhetoric.
Exactly. And being that we have so many legal minds on the panel, I would be remiss if I did not bring up the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer who had his knee on the neck of George Floyd this past May of last year. We're almost at a year when that event happened, but he's going to face additional charges of third-degree murder. The Hennepin County Judge Peter Cahill ruled on Thursday, today, after an appeals court ordered Cahill to reconsider his earlier decision to dismiss the charge. The court is going to grant the motion, Cahill said, to reinstate the third-degree murder charge. As law students and folks who are just civically engaged, we know that in order to be convicted of this crime, you have to have the requisite mental state and the action that follows. And it just really seemed clear cut. It didn't really seem like the defense to me had anything to work with. You have a man who deliberately had his knee on the guy's neck. And when you look at the transcript of George Floyd begging the man to come off his neck, saying that he's going to comply, saying that he's scared, saying, all of these things, begging for his life. And the man just hell-bent on keeping that knee on his neck. It's hard to say that the mental state wasn't there. We know the action was there, the death occurred. But for the defense to argue, this is not directly, murder, how do you make sense of that?
I'll hop in before you all get started because I feel you incredible minds are going to give me all that I need to know on the legal end. Thinking about it from the perspective as just a Black person in America, right? We all witnessed a great injustice. And over the summer, we all rallied together in not only his name, but also Breonna Taylor's name and other people that died last year at the hands of just senseless violence, but also white supremacy, right? I think that, and this was a conversation that we had with Leader Schumer here in the Senate earlier this week, is that we're going to have to, as Americans, we're going to have to rethink how policing is done in our country, because in order for people to feel safe, they also have to be able to vocalize, their disagreement without there being a sense of disrespect, right? Black people fear, and everybody has, especially all Black people, they have conversations with their kids like, you do not talk back to the police, right? When you have our counterparts that are able to do that and not have to worry about the repercussions of any of that stuff, just living life and doing whatever they want. So we have to rethink how policing is done, because not just we're in this case, but policing all over this country is done like that. It's happening like that right now in Missouri. We've seen it time and time again in St. Louis. We've seen it time and time again in Florida, in Georgia, all over this country. We're seeing these police departments using these out-of-date tactics, and they're calling it policing when they're essentially terrorizing communities. So for me, I'm a little relieved that he's going to be held accountable, but I'm also still very scared. I did not watch the video. I will not watch the video for my own mental health. And I'm encouraging people to be, involved as much as they can with the trial, but also do it at a risk of knowing that you're going to be exposed to some things that can cause you trauma. So that's where I am. So you go ahead and talk about all the good, juicy details now.
You gave some really juicy information yourself. But to that point, the fact that it's third degree to me is stunning, because that would mean that he unintentionally killed the man. But you have a man sitting on his neck for 9 minutes. How does that equate to, being unintentional? Anyone can jump in.
Well, I mean, yeah, it is absurd that this isn't even going to be considered as a first or, even second degree murder charge, considering the facts of the case. But I think all of us who are in third year law school have the same memo regarding qualified immunity that we had to work on. And it's wild what you can get away with as a law officer under qualified immunity, as long as that right has not been clearly established. And that's a moving target of a standard. So I think that it's a minor miracle that they were even looking at a murder charge for Mr. Sheldon, especially considering all of the caveats that the defense attorney is trying to put on the trial, like not referring to George Floyd as a victim. They're trying to make sure that he doesn't get any kind of like sympathetic representation. They're trying to mask what they did and make it seem justified, which I understand to a degree. Law enforcement, when they're in the heat of the moment acting in general, maybe they don't make the best decisions, and judges have to sort of reinforce that they acted correctly even when they didn't, so that there will be active cooperation between the judges and enforcement. That just makes sense. But this is an extreme issue, I think, in law enforcement. We know qualified immunity and all these other safeguards put in place to protect police officers and not citizens. So to answer your question, legally speaking, third degree is woefully inaccurate, I believe. But politically and socially, it's a minor miracle that we're even getting that.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I'm excited about what the House is doing in terms of legislation is that in the George Floyd bill that they're putting forward, there is a call to reform qualified immunity and make Section 1983 civil rights cases easier to put forward. And I think, the Biden administration put forward a plan in terms of, community policing and everything. The thing that stood out to me was reforming, how to show discriminatory intent, because that's such a high bar to meet. You have to show that there was a discriminatory motive. But how do you show motive in this time and age where, no one's going to blatantly, like they did in the 1950s and 1960s, make accusations that are racist or deny you based on the slope of your race, just expressly out like that. But to try to bring in this 21st century approach to how to bring forward these civil rights claims was one of the things I was excited about this administration for. And, for folks who are complaining about what are they doing for Black people, I would encourage them to stay engaged and pay attention because it'll go right over your head and you'll continue to complain and spread misinformation. As we were saying all night, the presidency makes a huge difference. And, who's in the executive position makes a huge difference because of all the appointment positions that come after that. Mike, Chris, Maria, anything?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of echoing and adding to what's already been said. I think it's tough because to speak to Jasmine's point about reforming police departments, like that's something that I think comes into play here, as well as what Cassandra was saying about safeguards for police officers who do things that are wrong. And I think that both of them are kind of intersected here because part of the reason why I think that first degree murder or second degree murder perhaps aren't available here is not something out of reality or out of justice, but out of the inadequacy of our legal environment, and also the institution of the social justice system in general. And what I mean by that is that as a police officer, if leaning on someone's knee, placing your knee on someone's neck is allowed as a matter of course, as a custom in that police department, that's a defense. Whether we like it or not, that's a defense that I assume is any good lawyer would bring up. And obviously you deal with the element of time. It's like, okay, well, placing your knee on someone's neck for 30 seconds to subdue them is not the same thing as doing it for 9 minutes as a person begs for their life. Clearly, those are two different circumstances. But I think that the notion that it's allowed still becomes a problem because that becomes a factual determination of whether the jury thinks that the 9 minutes is enough of a difference to make it go from an accident by a police officer doing his job to a homicide that's criminally liable. And so I think that's part of the issue is the customs that police departments have in place, and that allow police officers to fall back on and say, look, I was just doing what the department said I could do to handle the situation. And I think that also, and just to add really quickly, in addition to to add to the list of things that need to be reformed, is the way municipal liability is handled as well. Because when you sue a police officer, whether qualified immunity exists or not in that situation, one of the issues is that that's one officer. So even if that justice is served on that officer, there's still a custom of brutality in any given police force. And that's something that can only be addressed by a municipality. And so if you're allowed to take from the pockets of the municipalities, then it becomes an economics question of whether of at which point is a city or county willing to pay for officers wrongdoing, basically.
No, that's an excellent point. Anyone else before we wrap it up? Well, if not, I just want to thank this really amazing panelists, the few, the proud, the brave, the panelists. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I really enjoyed thoroughly this conversation. So much was shared, so much, in-depth knowledge was given. And, I want to encourage those who are viewing to continue to be engaged and to be cautious of misinformation that may be spreading online. I want to encourage you to be good citizens and pay attention to the legislative proposals that are being put forward on your behalf, and to act accordingly, make your votes accordingly, and participate in the electoral process accordingly. Thank you all so much for making episode 34 the episode it was. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude. I think President Biden is addressing the nation right now, so thank you all for giving your time. I really appreciate it. All right, have a good night, everyone.